"Your daughter isn't here. I bought this house," the new owner said. But he didn't notice a tiny chipped porcelain bird on the table. That bird was a secret code between mother and daughter, and it just told the mother everything about the terrible secret these walls were hiding. Before we begin my story, I ask you to do one small thing. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications. Every subscription gives a voice to stories like mine that need to be heard. Thank you, and God bless. The weariness of an 18-hour flight is a peculiar thing. It's a physical weight, a deep ache in the bones that no amount of shifting in a cramped airplane seat can alleviate. But underneath it all, there was a thrum of excitement, a warm current of anticipation that had carried me across the Atlantic from my quiet retirement home in Lisbon. For 2 years, I had only seen my daughter Chloe through the cold, unforgiving screen of a tablet. Now, I was just a taxi ride away from holding her, from breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, from seeing the laugh lines around her eyes that I knew as well as my own reflection. The taxi pulled up to the familiar oak-lined street in Charlotte, North Carolina. The dogwood trees were in bloom, their white and pink blossoms like a soft welcome blanket. This street, this very house, was the bedrock of our family's history. It was the house my late husband James and I had bought with every penny we'd saved. It was where we'd raised Chloe, where the pencil marks of her height still climbed up the kitchen doorframe, a testament to a childhood that felt both a lifetime ago and like only yesterday. James had been gone for 5 years now, but his presence lingered in the sturdy brickwork, in the rose bushes he'd so lovingly tended. He would have been overjoyed to know Chloe was living there, keeping the family legacy alive. I paid the driver, my hands trembling slightly with a mixture of fatigue and joy. I pulled my suitcase up the familiar slate walkway, my heart beating a little faster with each step. I pictured Chloe's face when she'd opened the door, the shock, the wide-eyed disbelief melting into a joyful cry. I hadn't told her I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise, a grand gesture of a mother's love, a sudden bright appearance to erase the distance that had separated us for too long. I stood before the deep blue door, the one James and I had painted together one hot summer afternoon. I took a deep, steadying breath, a smile already forming on my face. I lifted the heavy brass knocker, shaped like a lion's head, and let it fall once, twice, the sound echoing with a comforting finality. This was it. I was home. The seconds stretched into a minute. I could hear faint music from within, something modern and bass-heavy that I didn't recognize. Not Chloe's usual taste for jazz and soul. I frowned slightly. Maybe she was having friends over. I knocked again, a little louder this time. Finally, the lock clicked. The door swung inward, but the face that greeted me was not my daughter's. It was a man, younger than Chloe, perhaps in his late 20s. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and tired, indifferent eyes. He wore a faded t-shirt and held a video game controller in one hand. He looked at me, a complete stranger standing on the porch with my luggage, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice flat. My smile faltered. I felt a knot of confusion tighten in my stomach. I'm here to see Chloe," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "My daughter, Chloe Vance." The man stared at me blankly for a moment. He shifted his weight, leaning against the doorframe as if my presence were an inconvenience. "There's no Chloe here," he said, and started to close the door. "Wait!" I put my hand out, my palm flat against the cool wood. "This is her house, 214 Maple Street. I'm her mother, Eleanor Vance. I just flew in from Portugal." He sighed, a long, exasperated sound. He looked me up and down, from my travel-creased clothes to my sensible shoes, and a smirk played on his lips. It was a look I had seen before, the dismissive glance of youth towards age, a look that categorized and discarded you in a single moment. It was the kind of look that made you feel invisible. "Look, lady," he said, his tone dripping with a condescending sort of patience. "I don't know any Chloe. I bought this place 6 months ago. I live here." He gestured vaguely behind him into the hallway. From my angle, I could see that the familiar family portraits that had lined the walls were gone. The warm Persian runner we'd brought back from a trip to Turkey was replaced by a cheap, generic-looking mat. The soul of the house felt gone. A cold dread, far heavier than my travel fatigue, began to seep into my bones. This was all a mistake. It had to be. If you think this moment was the most shocking part of my day, you are sorely mistaken. The truth of what had happened to my daughter and our home was far more sinister than a simple misunderstanding, and this man was just the first piece of a puzzle that would threaten to destroy everything my husband and I had ever built. What I was about to uncover was a quiet betrayal that had been festering for months, right under my nose, an ocean away. I felt my legs tremble, the strength draining out of them. My suitcase, once a vessel of joyful reunions, suddenly felt like an anchor pulling me down. "That's impossible," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "This is my home. My daughter lives here." My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Had Chloe moved without telling me? Why would she do that? We spoke just last week. She'd talked about planting new hydrangeas in the front yard. She sounded happy, normal. None of this made any sense. I looked past the man, searching for any sign of my daughter, any familiar object, but saw nothing. The house felt alien. The man rolled his eyes, his patience clearly exhausted. "Listen, I've got the deed. The title, all of it. The sale was perfectly legal. Maybe you have the wrong address, or maybe your daughter, well, maybe she didn't tell you everything." He started to shut the door again, a final dismissive act. "No, please." My voice was sharper now, laced with a desperation that surprised even me. "There has to be a mistake. Can I see some proof? A piece of mail? Anything with your name on it?" I knew I sounded frantic, perhaps even unhinged, but the foundation of my world was cracking beneath my feet. He paused, studying my face. Perhaps he saw the genuine panic in my eyes, the deep, gut-wrenching fear of a mother who has flown across the world to find her child has vanished. He let out another long sigh. "Stay here," he grumbled, and disappeared back into the house, leaving the door slightly ajar. I could hear him rummaging around. The music was still playing, a relentless pulsing beat that felt like a mockery of the frantic rhythm in my own chest. Every second he was gone felt like an hour. I clutched the handle of my suitcase, my knuckles white. This strange, cold man held the key to a nightmare I couldn't yet comprehend. Was my daughter safe? Where was she? My mind conjured a dozen terrible scenarios, each one more frightening than the last. Had she been in an accident? Was she in trouble? The Chloe I knew, my responsible, loving Chloe, would never sell our family home without a word. She cherished this place and the memories it held as much as I did. The man returned, holding a crisp white envelope. He held it up for me to see. The name printed on it was Mark Coleman, followed by the address I knew by heart. My address, my home. "See?" he said, as if that single piece of paper explained everything. "Mark Coleman, that's me, no Chloe Vance. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm busy." He made to close the door for a third and final time. But just as the gap was narrowing, my eyes caught something. Over his shoulder on the small entryway table where a vase of my husband's favorite roses always used to sit, there was a small porcelain bird. It was a simple, hand-painted figurine of a bluebird, its wing chipped in a way I remembered perfectly. It was a gift I had given Chloe when she was 10 years old, a silly little trinket from a roadside antique shop. She had cherished it. She kept it on her nightstand for years. Why was it here? If she had sold the house and moved all her things, why would she leave that behind? It was a small detail, a tiny crack in the impossible story this man was telling me. And in that moment, the fear and confusion that had paralyzed me began to crystallize into something else entirely. It was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a tired old woman anymore, I was a mother. And I wasn't leaving this porch until I found out what had happened to my daughter and my home. The stranger in my house saw only a confused old lady. He had no idea that the chipped bluebird on the table behind him had just told me everything I needed to know. He thought he had the deed and the title, but I had something far more powerful, a mother's memory. And it was telling me that my daughter would never, ever leave that bird behind. What was the real story? I was about to turn this entire street upside down to find out. "That bluebird," I said, my voice steady now, cutting through his dismissive attitude. "The little porcelain bird on the table behind you. Where did you get it?" Mark Coleman glanced over his shoulder, his brow furrowing in mild irritation. "What? The bird? I don't know. It was just here when I moved in. Part of the junk left behind, I guess." Junk. He called it junk. A fire ignited in my chest, hot and fierce. That little bird represented a sun-drenched afternoon, a laughing 10-year-old girl, a memory so precious it felt sacred. To him it was just clutter. The casual disrespect of it all solidified my resolve. This was not just a misunderstanding, this was a violation. "I'd like to have it," I stated, not a request, but a demand. "It belongs to me." He chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "Lady, you can't just come here and claim items from my house. I'm about 2 seconds from calling the cops and having you removed for trespassing." "Go ahead," I challenged, lifting my chin. "Call them. I would love to speak with them. I'll tell them my name is Eleanor Vance and this was my house, legally in a family trust until 6 months ago. I'll tell them my daughter, Chloe Vance, lived here and is now missing. I'll tell them a man I've never met has taken possession of my property and all the heirlooms inside it and is refusing to answer simple questions. I wonder what they'll make of that." I held his gaze, pouring every ounce of conviction I possessed into my eyes. I was no longer the frail, weary traveler. I was the widow of James Vance, a man who had taught me that the law, when wielded correctly, was a shield for the righteous. Something in my tone must have given him pause. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. He was a bully, but like most bullies, he was a coward underneath. He was counting on me being easily intimidated, on me shuffling away in confused defeat. He had miscalculated badly. He didn't know the steel in my spine, forged through years of raising a family, of standing by my husband, of navigating a world that often underestimated a woman like me. He chewed on his lip, reconsidering. "Look, I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice losing its edge. "The sale was handled by a lawyer, a realtor. Everything was above board. I have the papers to prove it." "Then you have nothing to fear from a conversation with the police, do you, Mr. Coleman?" I pressed, deliberately using his name. I wanted him to know I had seen it, registered it, and would remember it. The standoff hung in the air, thick and heavy. The relentless music from inside the house seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of us now, locked in a battle of wills on the porch of the house that held my entire life's memories. He was an invader, a usurper, and that chipped bluebird was my flag, the symbol of the land I would not cede. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he stepped back. "Fine," he snapped. "Take the stupid bird, but then you have to leave. I'm serious. One more minute and I'm calling the police." He disappeared for a moment and returned, thrusting the small porcelain figure into my hand. Its cool, familiar weight was a comfort, a tiny piece of my real life in this surreal nightmare. I wrapped my fingers around it, its fragile form a stark contrast to the strength of my grip. "Thank you," I said, my voice dripping with an irony that was lost on him. I didn't move. "I said leave," he insisted, his voice rising. "And I will," I replied calmly, "as soon as you give me the name of the realtor and the lawyer who handled this supposed sale." He stared at me, dumbfounded, as if he couldn't believe my audacity. I could see the gears turning in his head. He wanted me gone. Giving me the names was the quickest way to achieve that. With a frustrated sigh, he rattled off a name, Cynthia Moore from Apex Realty, and a law firm, Dawson and Finch. I repeated them back to him slowly, committing them to memory. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Coleman," I said, my tone formal, professional. I turned without another word, picked up the handle of my suitcase, and walked away from the blue door of the home that was no longer mine. I didn't look back. I could feel his eyes on me, a mixture of anger and perhaps a newfound grudging respect. As I reached the sidewalk, the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. I was 68 years old, exhausted from an international flight, and standing on a street in Charlotte with my luggage, a porcelain bird, and the names of two strangers. My daughter was missing, my home was occupied, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The initial shock had given way to adrenaline, but now a cold, creeping fear began to take its place. What was my next move? Where would I even go? I reached into my purse, my fingers searching for my phone. My first instinct was to call Chloe, but her phone had been going straight to voicemail all day, which I'd assumed was because she was at work. Now, the unanswered calls felt ominous. I needed a clear head. I couldn't fall apart, not now. James always used to say, "Eleanor, when you don't know what to do, do what you know." What did I know? I knew this neighborhood. I knew the people. 2 doors down lived Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman who had been my friend and neighbor for over 30 years. She had known Chloe since she was a baby. She saw everything on this street. If anyone would know what had been happening at my house, it would be her. With a new sense of purpose, I pulled my suitcase behind me, my tired legs carrying me towards the familiar comfort of a friendly face. Mrs. Gable's porch was my sanctuary, my first step in taking back my life. This battle had just begun, and I was mobilizing my first soldier. As I walked toward my neighbor's house, clutching the tiny bird, I felt a new wave of dread. Mrs. Gable knew everything that happened on our street. I was hoping for answers, but I wasn't prepared for the terrible truth she was about to tell me. A story of strange cars in the night, of a daughter who suddenly stopped visiting, and of a secret so dark it would make a stranger in my house seem like the least of my problems. Martha Gable's home was a mirror of her soul, neat, welcoming, and rooted in tradition. Her porch swing, where we had shelled countless peas and shared decades of neighborhood news, swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. As I walked up her pathway, the scent of her prize-winning azaleas filled the air, a fragrance that should have been comforting, but now felt jarringly out of place in my chaotic new reality. I felt like a ghost haunting my own past, a visitor in a life that was mine only hours ago. Martha was 82, with eyes that had seen the turn of a century and a spirit that had weathered more storms than I could count. She opened the door before I could knock, her face, usually wreathed in a gentle smile, etched with profound concern. "Eleanor, child," she exclaimed, her voice a reedy but strong comfort. She pulled me into a hug that smelled of lavender and old Bibles. "I saw you down the street. I saw that man. Lord have mercy, I've been praying you'd come." She led me inside, her hand a warm, steady presence on my arm. She settled me into a plush armchair in her living room, a room crowded with photographs of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a testament to a life lived for family. She didn't ask questions right away. She was from a generation of women who knew that comfort came first, that a crisis required a steady hand and a hot cup of tea before the floodgates of inquiry could be opened. As she bustled in the kitchen, I looked around her home. Every object had a story. It was what made a house a home, not the bricks and mortar, but the life breathed into it, the thought of my own home, stripped of our family's soul and occupied by a stranger, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. I held the small porcelain bird in my lap, its smooth surface, a tiny solid anchor in a sea of uncertainty. Martha returned with a tray bearing a steaming teapot, 2 porcelain cups, and a plate of her famous lemon pound cake. She set it down on the coffee table between us, her movements deliberate and calming. "Now," she said, pouring the amber liquid into my cup, "you tell me everything, from the beginning." I recounted the entire surreal experience. The 18-hour flight filled with anticipation, the shock of seeing Mark Coleman, his cruel, dismissive words, and his claim to own my house. As I spoke, the tears I had been holding back finally began to fall. Silent, hot tracks down my cheeks. Martha just listened, her gaze never leaving my face, nodding slowly, her expression a mixture of pity and a slow-burning anger on my behalf. When I finished, she set her teacup down with a soft click. "That boy is lying," she said, her voice firm. "Not about living there, maybe. But that house was not sold. It was stolen." I looked at her, my heart seizing. "What do you mean, Martha? What have you seen?" She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Things haven't been right at your house for months, Eleanor, ever since that man started coming around." "What man?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Not Mark Coleman?" "No, not that one. This was someone else. Older, slick. Drove a black car so shiny you could see your reflection in it. He started visiting Chloe about 4, maybe 5 months ago. At first, I thought he might be a new suitor, though he didn't seem her type, but they were never smiling. They'd stand on the porch, and he'd be talking low and fast, and Chloe, oh, Eleanor, that child looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. She got thin. She stopped tending to your husband's roses. The light just went out of her eyes. A cold dread washed over me, more chilling than anything I had felt on the porch. This wasn't about a man moving in. This was about a man who had systematically broken my daughter's spirit. Martha continued, her voice low. "I tried to ask her about it once. I brought her a slice of this very cake. She opened the door, and she looked right through me. Eleanor. Like she didn't even see me. She thanked me, but her voice was flat. She said she was busy, that she had a lot on her mind. That was the last time I saw her, about 2 months ago." 2 months? I choked out the words. "But we speak every week. She called me from the house just last Tuesday." Or had she? I replayed the conversation in my head. The connection had been poor. She'd said she was walking in the park. Was it possible she hadn't been at the house at all? Was she pretending everything was fine to protect me? One day, about 6 weeks back, Martha went on, her gaze fixed on a point in the distance as if replaying the memory. A real estate sign went up in the yard. For sale. I nearly fell off my porch swing. I called Chloe's number right away, but it went straight to that voicemail of hers. A week later, there was a moving truck. Not a big one. They took a few boxes, some clothes, and then that boy, that Mark Coleman, he moved in, and Chloe, she was just gone. It all happened so fast, Eleanor. It was wrong. It felt wrong in my spirit. The pieces were beginning to form a terrifying picture. My daughter, isolated and under duress, a slick, mysterious man, a rushed, secretive sale of a house that was meant to be her inheritance, her sanctuary. This wasn't a betrayal by Chloe. It was a betrayal of her. She wasn't a culprit. She was a victim. The anger I felt toward her for selling our home evaporated, replaced by a fierce, primal wave of fear for her safety. Where was she? Who was this man in the shiny black car? What kind of trouble was my daughter in? Martha, I said, my voice shaking but my resolve hardening, did you get a look at this man? Could you describe him? She nodded slowly. Oh, I saw him plenty. He had a face you don't forget, looked like a vulture in a $1,000 suit. Martha's description of the man sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't just a random description of a slick operator. She described a feature, a small crescent-shaped scar above his right eyebrow that I knew all too well. It belonged to a man from my husband's past, a man we all thought we had left behind for good. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a stolen house or a missing daughter. This was about a ghost coming back to collect an old debt, and I was standing right in his path. The name that Martha Gable's description conjured from the deep recesses of my memory was Vincent Blackwood. He was a real estate developer my husband James had faced in court nearly 20 years ago. James, working as a pro bono lawyer for our community, had stopped Blackwood from bulldozing a block of historic homes owned by black families to build luxury condos. James had won. He'd exposed Blackwood's predatory tactics and fraudulent documents. Blackwood had lost a fortune and, more importantly, he'd lost face. The crescent-shaped scar over his eye, a souvenir from a childhood accident, had been a detail James had mentioned, a distinguishing mark on a man he called a snake in a silk tie. We all thought Blackwood had left Charlotte for good after that humiliation. It seemed we were wrong. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. This wasn't random. This was revenge. Blackwood had come back to take from James the one thing he treasured most, his home and his family. And he was using my daughter to do it. Thank you, Martha, I said, my voice low and steady. The time for tears was over. Fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. Now I needed to act. You have given me more than you know. What are you going to do, Eleanor? She asked, her hand clutching mine. I'm going to do what James would have done, I replied, standing up. I'm going to follow the paper trail, and I'm going to start with the realtor. My first stop was a small hotel a few blocks away. I couldn't afford to be on the street. I needed a base of operations, a quiet place to think. After checking in and leaving my suitcase in a sterile, anonymous room, I took a taxi to the address Mark Coleman had given me for Apex Realty. It wasn't in the bustling uptown district with the other high-end firms. It was a small, sad-looking office tucked away in a strip mall between a laundromat and a vape shop. The sign was faded, the windows dusty. This was not the office of a realtor who handled legitimate, high-value properties. This was the office of someone who cut corners. The woman at the desk looked up as I entered. She was in her late 40s with brassy blonde hair and a tense, practiced smile. A nameplate on her desk read, Cynthia Moore. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice as brittle as her smile. "Yes," I said, walking slowly towards her desk. I placed my hands on its edge and leaned in slightly, making sure I had her full attention. "My name is Eleanor Vance. You sold my house." The smile on her face didn't so much fall as it shattered. A flicker of panic entered her eyes before being quickly suppressed. She shuffled some papers on her desk, avoiding my gaze. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken. I don't—" 214. "Maple Street," I cut her off. "Sold about 6 weeks ago to a Mr. Mark Coleman. The transaction was handled by your office and the law firm Dawson and Finch. Does that refresh your memory, Ms. Moore?" She swallowed hard. "Oh, that property. Yes, a lovely home. The seller, your daughter, was very motivated. It was a very quick, clean sale." "Was it?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Because a house is part of the Vance family trust. A sale would require the signatures of 3 trustees and a 60-day public notice. I am the primary trustee, Ms. Moore, and I assure you, I signed nothing. So tell me, how exactly did you manage this clean sale?" Cynthia Moore's professional facade was crumbling fast. Her face paled. She started to bluster, talking about powers of attorney and certified documents, but the words were hollow. She was a middleman, a pawn in a much larger game, and she knew the paperwork she'd pushed through was as flimsy as her smile. "My daughter," I pressed on. "Chloe Vance, where is she? I know she was under some kind of duress. Who was with her when she signed these papers you speak of?" I can't disclose client information," she stammered, grabbing onto the phrase like a life raft. "Privacy policies." "I believe fraud and coercion void most privacy policies, don't you?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The cold, righteous anger I felt was more potent than any shout. A man was pressuring her. A man with a scar over his right eye. His name is Vincent Blackwood. At the mention of his name, a genuine, undeniable terror flashed in Cynthia Moore's eyes. It was the confirmation I needed. She knew him. She was afraid of him. This woman wasn't just a negligent realtor. She was a conspirator, willing or not. "I don't know who you're talking about," she whispered, her eyes darting towards the door as if expecting Blackwood himself to walk in. "The sale was legal. Everything was signed. Now, I have to ask you to leave." I knew I wouldn't get anything more from her, not yet, but I had accomplished my mission. I had rattled her. I had confirmed Blackwood's involvement. "I'll leave," I said, straightening up. "But let me give you a piece of advice, Miss Moore. You have entangled yourself with a very dangerous man for what I assume is a paltry commission. When this all comes to light, and believe me, it will, you are going to need a friend. I suggest you think very carefully about which side you want to be on." I turned and walked out of her office, my head held high. I didn't go far. I crossed the street and stood in the shadow of the laundromat's awning, my eyes fixed on her office window. I had a feeling her composure would break the moment she thought I was gone. I was right. Not 30 seconds later, I saw her snatch her phone from her desk, her fingers flying across the screen. She put the phone to her ear, her expression frantic. She was pacing, talking, her fear palpable even from across the street. She thought I was just a confused, grieving mother. She had no idea that I had just landed my first real blow in a war she didn't even know she was fighting. From across the street, I watched the panicked realtor make her phone call. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her fear was a confession. But then she did something I didn't expect. After the call, she grabbed her purse and rushed out of the office, heading not home but toward the downtown legal district. She was running scared, and I knew exactly where she was going, to the law firm that had rubber-stamped this fraudulent sale. Dawson and Finch was my next stop, but I wasn't going in as a victim. I was going in with a secret weapon she and her bosses could never have anticipated: my husband's old law partner. There are moments in life when the world shrinks down to a single clear purpose. As I sat in the back of the taxi, heading towards the gleaming towers of uptown Charlotte, the city I once called home felt like a foreign landscape. The fatigue, the confusion, the grief, they were all still there, but they had been packed down, compressed into a hard, dense core of resolve. Vincent Blackwood had come back from the past like a specter, and he had my daughter. The only man I knew who had ever faced that devil and won was my James. And the man who had stood beside him, his shield and his counsel, was Samuel Jordan. Samuel and James were a study in contrasts. Where my husband was all fiery courtroom passion and soaring rhetoric, Samuel was quiet, methodical, and devastatingly precise. He was the chess master who saw the whole board, the man who found the single fatal flaw in an opponent's argument and dismantled it piece by piece. They had built a small but mighty law practice together, a practice dedicated to giving a voice to the voiceless in our community. After James passed, Samuel had mostly retired, handing the reins to younger partners, but I knew his mind was as sharp as it had ever been. His office was on the 30th floor of a glass and steel building that scraped the Carolina sky. It was a world away from the dusty strip mall office of Cynthia Moore. When I walked in, the receptionist recognized me instantly, her professional smile warming with genuine affection. "Mrs. Vance, it's so good to see you. Let me tell Mr. Jordan you're here." Samuel met me in the lobby. He was grayer now, and he leaned slightly on a handsome mahogany cane, but his eyes were the same, calm, intelligent, and missing nothing. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a deep, comforting baritone. He took both my hands in his. "It's been too long, but I can see in your eyes this isn't a social call. Come in, sit down, tell me what's wrong." In the quiet of his book-lined office, with the city sprawling beneath us, I laid out the whole ugly story. I told him about my flight, the stranger in my home, the porcelain bird I now held in my hand like a talisman. I relayed Martha Gable's chilling observations and the terror I had seen in the realtor's eyes at the mention of one name: Vincent Blackwood. As I spoke, Samuel listened without interruption. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. When I mentioned Blackwood, a flicker of something ancient and angry appeared in his eyes. He remembered. He remembered the fight, the threats, the sheer, malevolent greed of the man. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He rose from his chair, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. "That man is a cancer," he said, more to the skyline than to me. "You cut him out. But if you leave a single cell behind, he comes back, more aggressive than before." He turned back to me, and he was no longer a retiree. He was the lawyer James had called his brother-in-arms. "All right, Eleanor, let's go to work. The first thing we need to do is see what trail they left. A man like Blackwood thinks he's clever, but greed makes men sloppy." For the next hour, Samuel was a whirlwind of quiet, focused activity. He wasn't a man who made loud, angry calls. He sent discreet text messages and emails to contacts deep within the city's records departments and legal community. His fingers, though gnarled with age, flew across his keyboard with practiced ease. On his large monitor, he pulled up city property records, title transfer documents, and corporate filings. Just as I thought, he muttered, pointing to the screen. The house was purchased by a shell corporation, Maple Street Holdings LLC, registered just 3 months ago, untraceable on the surface. And the law firm, Dawson and Finch, they have a reputation. They're the legal equivalent of a back alley chop shop. They specialize in making dirty deals look clean. He kept digging. Blackwood's been busy since he came back to town. He's been buying up properties in historically black neighborhoods again, all through these ghost companies. He's trying to do exactly what James stopped him from doing 20 years ago, but he's being smarter about it this time. No bulldozers. He's using financial pressure, legal trickery, squeezing people out one by one. My house, our home, was just one piece of his vengeful puzzle, and he had used my daughter, my sweet Chloe, as his key. A fresh wave of fury washed through me. "Here it is," Samuel said, his voice grim. He enlarged a document on the screen. It was a digital copy of a durable power of attorney. It gave Chloe the legal right to act on my behalf in all property matters. It gave her the power to sell the house, and it was the key to their entire scheme. He would have isolated her, Samuel explained, his voice gentle but firm. Made her feel like she was in some kind of trouble, maybe a tax problem or a looming debt, and convinced her this was the only way to protect her mother's primary asset. He would have presented himself as her savior. My eyes scanned the document. I saw Chloe's signature at the bottom. It looked shaky, forced. Not her confident, elegant script, but then my gaze fell on the line below it. The witness signature, according to the document, the person who had watched my daughter sign away our family's legacy, the person who had verified her identity and willingness, was someone we had known for years. It wasn't the name of a stranger or a lawyer or anyone associated with Vincent Blackwood. The name on the witness line was David Mercer. Dr. David Mercer. He had been our family doctor for 30 years. He had treated Chloe's childhood asthma and held my hand when I lost James. He was a pillar of our church, a man we trusted completely. And he had just become the central figure in my daughter's disappearance. Seeing Dr. Mercer's name on that document felt like a physical blow. It was a betrayal so profound it stole the air from my lungs. Vincent Blackwood was a villain I could understand. He was an old enemy. But David Mercer, he was family. He was the man who had delivered the news of my husband's passing with tears in his own eyes. The thought of him being involved, of him standing by while my daughter was coerced into signing away her birthright, was unthinkable. And yet there was his signature, as clear as day. "Samuel, this can't be right," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "David, why would he do this?" Samuel's face was grim. He leaned back in his chair, the legal strategist replaced by the weary observer of human weakness. "Money, Eleanor, or debt, or blackmail. A man like Blackwood finds a person's weakness and squeezes until they break. A doctor has access to information, to people. He can appear trustworthy. To Chloe, his presence would have made the entire scam seem legitimate." A terrible realization dawned on me. Dr. Mercer would have known I was out of the country. He would have known Chloe was alone. He was the perfect inside man. "What's our next move?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage that was eclipsing my shock. "Legally, we have everything we need," Samuel said, his focus returning. "With your testimony, Martha's statement, and the clear conflict of interest involving Dr. Mercer, I can file an emergency injunction and a lis pendens on the property. That will freeze the title. Mark Coleman won't be able to sell it or borrow against it. We'll tie it up in court so tight, Blackwood won't be able to touch it. I'll do that right now." But that doesn't find Chloe, I countered, my fear for her well-being overriding everything else. No, it doesn't, Samuel agreed. That's our other front. The police will be slow to act on this. They'll see it as a civil matter, a family dispute. We need to get to Mercer before he has time to cover his tracks. A lawyer showing up at his door will just make him call Blackwood. But you... He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sad understanding. He won't be expecting you, Eleanor. You're his patient. You're his friend. You are the ghost of his conscience, and you might be the only one who can make him talk. An hour later, I was sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Mercer's clinic. The familiar, sterile smell of antiseptic, the soft muzak playing through the speakers, it was all so nauseatingly normal. The nurse greeted me with a warm smile, asking if I was there for a checkup. No, I said calmly. I need to speak with the doctor about a personal matter. It's an emergency. When he finally opened the door to his office, the sight of me sitting there sent a visible shockwave through him. Dr. Mercer was a man who prided himself on his calm, reassuring demeanor, but in that moment, all the color drained from his face. Eleanor, he stammered, what a surprise. I didn't know you were back in the country. Evidently not, I said, walking past him into his private office and sitting down without being invited. He followed, closing the door slowly behind him. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the porcelain bluebird on his large mahogany desk. He stared at it as if it were a scorpion. Chloe is missing, David, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of my fury. And my house has been sold. And for some reason, your name is on the paperwork that made it all possible. He sank into his leather chair, his face collapsing. He looked 10 years older than he had a minute ago. He couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the little bird. Eleanor, I can explain. Can you? I leaned forward. Can you explain how you could look my daughter in the eye and help a man like Vincent Blackwood destroy her, the man who tried to ruin this community, the man James fought with everything he had? The dam of his composure broke. Sobs racked his body, pathetic, gulping sounds of a weak man who had been caught. He had me, Eleanor, he cried, his words choked. My son, he has a gambling problem. He owed a lot of money to the wrong people. Blackwood bought his debt. He said he'd ruin him, send him to prison, worse. He said if I did this one thing, he'd wipe the slate clean. He told me no one would get hurt. He said it was just a business deal, that Chloe would get a share of the money. And you believed him? I asked, my voice laced with contempt. You've known me for 30 years, David. Did you really think I cared about the money? He took her, he whispered, his face buried in his hands. After I witnessed the signature, he said he was taking Chloe somewhere safe to an apartment uptown until the money cleared and you had accepted the situation. He said it was to protect her, but he was lying. I haven't been able to reach her for a month. He won't answer my calls. I felt a sliver of ice slide down my spine. She wasn't in an apartment. She was his prisoner. She was his leverage. Where, David? I demanded. Where did he take her? I don't know the address, he wailed. I swear to you, Eleanor, I don't know. But he said something strange. As they were leaving, Chloe was crying and he told her to be quiet. He said, Don't worry, I'm just taking you home back to Sparrowwood. Sparrowwood. The name hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't an apartment complex or a street name. The Sparrowwood Mill was a massive, abandoned textile factory on the south side of town, a place that had been derelict for 50 years. It was the centerpiece of the very land Vincent Blackwood had tried to steal from our community 20 years ago, the land my husband had saved. He hadn't just taken my daughter to hold her hostage. He had taken her to the very heart of his old defeat. This wasn't about business anymore. This was a pilgrimage of hate, and I was the only one who knew the final stop. Leaving Dr. Mercer's office, I was no longer just a mother. I was a woman on a singular, sacred mission. The name Sparrowwood was not a clue. It was a map, a destination burned into my memory by the stories my husband had told. James had described that mill as a sleeping giant, a relic of a bygone era. It was the place where he had drawn his line in the sand against Vincent Blackwood's greed. Now, it was the place I would go to get my daughter back. In the taxi, I called Samuel. My voice was eerily calm, the calm that comes when all the fear in your body has been distilled into a single point of focus. "He has her at the old Sparrowwood mill," I said, without preamble. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, stay where you are. I'm calling the police right now. I'll give them the location. Don't you go anywhere near that place. It's not safe." "There's no time, Samuel," I replied, my eyes fixed on the passing city streets. "You know as well as I do how these things work. By the time they get a warrant or assemble a team, he could be gone. Or worse. I'm not going to confront him, but I'm going to be there. I'll be their eyes and ears on the ground. Just get them there. Fast." I hung up before he could argue. I knew the risks. I was a 68-year-old woman, not a hero, but a mother's love is its own kind of power, and in that moment, I felt stronger than I had in years. I directed the taxi driver toward the industrial outskirts of town, my heart a steady, determined drumbeat in my chest. The Sparrowwood Mill rose against the evening sky like a tombstone. Its red brick walls were stained with decades of neglect, and its hundreds of windows were like vacant eyes, most of them shattered. Kudzu vines, thick as a man's arm, crawled up its sides, threatening to pull the whole structure back into the earth. The entire property was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with rust-colored barbed wire. It was a fortress of decay. I had the driver drop me off a block away and watched until his taillights disappeared. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rust. I walked the perimeter of the fence, my sensible shoes crunching on gravel. I was looking for a weakness, and my memory, my most trusted weapon, supplied it. James had once taken me on a drive out here years ago, pointing out the mill. He had gestured to a corner on the far side where a giant oak tree had fallen in a storm years prior, crushing a section of the fence. The city had never bothered to fix it. I found it, just as he'd described. A gap in the fence, partially obscured by weeds. I slipped through, my coat snagging slightly on the twisted metal. I was inside. The factory floor was a cavernous, terrifying cathedral of industry. Giant, silent looms and spinning machines, shrouded in cobwebs, stood like metal skeletons in the gloom. The only light came from shafts of dusty twilight slanting down from the high, grimy windows. My footsteps echoed in the oppressive silence. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind whistling through a broken pane sent a jolt through my nerves. Then I heard it. Voices, muffled but sharp with anger. They were coming from the heart of the factory. I moved toward the sound, my body a shadow, slipping between rusting monoliths of machinery. In the center of the vast expanse was a small glass-walled office, the old foreman's office, and a single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light from within. I crept closer, my breath held tight in my chest, and peered through the grimy glass. And I saw her, my Chloe. She was sitting in a chair, looking pale and exhausted, but her chin was held high. Standing over her was Vincent Blackwood. He looked older, his face harsher than I remembered, but the scar over his eye was the same. He was waving a piece of paper in her face. Just sign it, Chloe, he was saying, his voice a venomous purr. It's the last step. The funds from the house get transferred and we can all move on. You've been so cooperative until now. I won't, Chloe said, her voice shaking but firm. You lied to me. You lied about everything. That house is all my mother has left of my father. I won't let you take it. Blackwood laughed, a cruel, grating sound that echoed in the huge space. Your father, your sainted father. He humiliated me. He cost me millions. He stood up in that courtroom and called me a predator. But look who won in the end. I have his house. I have his daughter. I've erased his entire legacy with a few strokes of a pen. Signing this is just the punctuation at the end of the sentence. His gloating monologue confirmed everything. This was his masterpiece of revenge. My daughter was not a partner. She was his final trophy. I watched, my heart breaking and swelling with pride at the same time. She was her father's daughter, defiant to the very end. But I could see the unhinged glint in Blackwood's eyes. His patience was wearing thin. He was a man on the edge, and the police were still minutes away. I couldn't wait. I had to do something. My eyes darted around the dark factory floor, searching for anything, any advantage, and then I saw it. On the main support pillar, not 20 feet from where I was hiding, was a large metal box with a single heavy red lever. It was the emergency fire alarm control for the old sprinkler system. It was ancient, covered in dust. It probably hadn't been touched in 50 years, but if it still worked, it would create the one thing I needed most: chaos. Absolutely. Here is the final chapter of Eleanor's story. Chapter 4, Part 1. Leaving Dr. Mercer's office, I was no longer just a mother. I was a woman on a singular, sacred mission. The name Sparrowwood was not a clue. It was a map, a destination burned into my memory by the stories my husband had told. James had described that mill as a sleeping giant, a relic of a bygone era. It was the place where he had drawn his line in the sand against Vincent Blackwood's greed. Now, it was the place I would go to get my daughter back. In the taxi, I called Samuel. My voice was eerily calm, the calm that comes when all the fear in your body has been distilled into a single point of focus. He has her at the old Sparrowwood mill, I said without preamble. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Eleanor, stay where you are. I'm calling the police right now. I'll give them the location. Don't you go anywhere near that place. It's not safe. There's no time, Samuel, I replied, my eyes fixed on the passing city streets. You know as well as I do how these things work. By the time they get a warrant or assemble a team, he could be gone. Or worse. I'm not going to confront him. But I'm going to be there. I'll be their eyes and ears on the ground. Just get them there. Fast. I hung up before he could argue. I knew the risks. I was a 68-year-old woman, not a hero, but a mother's love is its own kind of power, and in that moment I felt stronger than I had in years. I directed the taxi driver toward the industrial outskirts of town, my heart a steady, determined drumbeat in my chest. The Sparrowwood Mill rose against the evening sky like a tombstone. Its red brick walls were stained with decades of neglect, and its hundreds of windows were like vacant eyes, most of them shattered. Kudzu vines, thick as a man's arm, crawled up its sides, threatening to pull the whole structure back into the earth. The entire property was surrounded by a high chain-link fence topped with rust-colored barbed wire. It was a fortress of decay. I had the driver drop me off a block away and watched until his taillights disappeared. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp earth and rust. I walked the perimeter of the fence, my sensible shoes crunching on gravel. I was looking for a weakness, and my memory, my most trusted weapon, supplied it. James had once taken me on a drive out here years ago, pointing out the mill. He had gestured to a corner on the far side where a giant oak tree had fallen in a storm years prior, crushing a section of the fence. The city had never bothered to fix it. I found it just as he'd described. A gap in the fence partially obscured by weeds. I slipped through, my coat snagging slightly on the twisted metal. I was inside. The factory floor was a cavernous, terrifying cathedral of industry. Giant, silent looms and spinning machines, shrouded in cobwebs, stood like metal skeletons in the gloom. The only light came from shafts of dusty twilight slanting down from the high, grimy windows. My footsteps echoed in the oppressive silence. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind whistling through a broken pane sent a jolt through my nerves. Then I heard it. Voices, muffled but sharp with anger. They were coming from the heart of the factory. I moved toward the sound, my body a shadow, slipping between rusting monoliths of machinery. In the center of the vast expanse was a small glass-walled office, the old foreman's office, and a single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light from within. I crept closer, my breath held tight in my chest, and peered through the grimy glass. And I saw her. My Chloe. She was sitting in a chair looking pale and exhausted, but her chin was held high. Standing over her was Vincent Blackwood. He looked older, his face harsher than I remembered, but the scar over his eye was the same. He was waving a piece of paper in her face. "Just sign it, Chloe," he was saying, his voice a venomous purr. "It's the last step. The funds from the house get transferred and we can all move on. You've been so cooperative until now." "I won't," Chloe said, her voice shaking but firm. "You lied to me. You lied about everything. That house is all my mother has left of my father. I won't let you take it." Blackwood laughed, a cruel, grating sound that echoed in the huge space. "Your father, your sainted father, he humiliated me. He cost me millions. He stood up in that courtroom and called me a predator. But look who won in the end. I have his house. I have his daughter. I've erased his entire legacy with a few strokes of a pen. Signing this is just the punctuation at the end of the sentence." His gloating monologue confirmed everything. This was his masterpiece of revenge. My daughter was not a partner. She was his final trophy. I watched, my heart breaking and swelling with pride at the same time. She was her father's daughter, defiant to the very end. But I could see the unhinged glint in Blackwood's eyes. His patience was wearing thin. He was a man on the edge, and the police were still minutes away. I couldn't wait. I had to do something. My eyes darted around the dark factory floor, searching for anything, any advantage. And then I saw it. On the main support pillar, not 20 feet from where I was hiding, was a large metal box with a single heavy red lever. It was the emergency fire alarm control for the old sprinkler system. It was ancient, covered in dust. It probably hadn't been touched in 50 years. But if it still worked, it would create the one thing I needed most: chaos. Hook le consaglave. My hand trembled as I reached for the lever. This was it. There would be no turning back. In his moment of triumph, Vincent Blackwood had forgotten one thing about my husband's legacy. He had left a widow behind. I was about to give this sleeping giant a wake-up call it would never forget. The ghost in this machine was about to get very, very loud. Chapter 4, Part 2. My fingers, numb with cold and fear, wrapped around the dusty red lever. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. I could see Blackwood's face contorting with rage, his hand reaching for Chloe's arm. I pulled down with every ounce of strength I had. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. The lever groaned, stiff with a half-century of disuse. Then, with a deafening screech of protesting metal, it gave way. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. Massive bells, loud as church bells from hell, began clanging throughout the factory. Red emergency lights, strobing and frantic, painted the cavernous space in flashes of crimson. It was a symphony of chaos, a sudden, violent awakening. Inside the office, Blackwood staggered back, his hands flying to his ears. The sheer volume was disorienting. In that moment of confusion, Chloe acted. With a cry of defiance, she shoved the heavy wooden desk into his legs and ran. "Chloe!" I screamed, my voice cutting through the din. She saw me, a silhouette in the flashing red light. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and then flooded with tears of relief. She ran towards me, weaving through the maze of machinery. We met in a desperate, clinging embrace, the clanging bells a soundtrack to our reunion. "Mama, what are you doing here?" She sobbed into my shoulder. "I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm always with you," I whispered, holding her tight. "Always." Our reunion was cut short by a roar of pure fury. Blackwood had recovered. He saw us, and his face was a mask of murderous rage. His prize was escaping. His perfect revenge was falling apart. He started towards us, his steps heavy and menacing, but then another sound joined the cacophony, a sound that to me was sweeter than any orchestra. The rising and falling wail of police sirens growing closer with every second. Samuel had come through. Blackwood heard it too. Panic replaced the rage in his eyes. He was trapped. He gave us one last look of pure hatred before turning and running towards a loading bay door on the far side of the mill. He wasn't going to escape. Not this time. Just as he wrenched the heavy door open, 2 police cars screeched to a halt outside, their headlights pinning him like a startled animal. Uniformed officers swarmed out, weapons drawn. His hands flew into the air. The fight was over. Vincent Blackwood's long, bitter war against my family had ended here, in the decaying monument to his first failure. Later, wrapped in the warmth of a scratchy police blanket, I watched them lead him away in handcuffs. Chloe was beside me, her hand gripping mine as she gave her statement to a detective. Samuel arrived, his face a mixture of relief and stern disapproval at my recklessness. He put a comforting arm around my shoulders. "The injunction is filed, Eleanor," he said softly. "The house is safe. It's all over." A few weeks later, the house on Maple Street was ours again. The legal battle had been swift and decisive. With Dr. Mercer's full confession and Chloe's testimony, the fraudulent sale was voided. Mark Coleman, who turned out to be just a clueless renter Blackwood had installed, was gone. The house still felt a little strange, a little empty, as if the trauma had temporarily silenced its soul. But day by day, we were bringing it back to life. We put the family photos back on the hallway wall. We baked my husband's favorite buttermilk biscuits, filling the rooms with a familiar, comforting scent. And on the small entryway table where it belonged sat the little porcelain bluebird, its chipped wing a badge of honor. One sunny afternoon, Chloe and I were in the garden tending to James's roses. Her hands, once shaky and uncertain, were now steady as she pruned a delicate new shoot. "I'm so sorry, Mama," she said quietly, not looking at me. "I was so scared. He made me feel so alone, so trapped. I should have called you." I stopped my work and took her hand. "My darling girl," I said, looking into her eyes, which were finally clear and bright again. "Strength is not about never feeling weak or scared. It's about surviving it. You survived, you were brave, and you were never, ever alone." We stood there for a long time, mother and daughter, surrounded by the legacy of the man we both loved. The house stood behind us, silent and strong, a witness to our family's trial and its triumph. The ghost of Vincent Blackwood was gone, banished not by lawyers or police, but by the simple, unbreakable power of a family that refused to be erased. We were home. And we were whole. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Stories like this are a reminder that even in our darkest hours, there is hope, and the strength of family can overcome any injustice. If my story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so that more stories like this can be heard. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. Thank you, and be blessed.